Hi everyone! Today I'm going to show you my ultimate tips and tricks for getting a lovely smooth satin stitch. You're going to learn how many strands of floss you should use, what guidelines are and how they'll help you, one trick that will really help your satin stitch keep its shape, and much more. So when you're ready, let's get started. One thing that has a huge impact on how smooth your satin stitch turns out is the number of strands you stitch with at one time. I stitched this biggest circle here using 6 strands, and as you can see, it's turned out pretty rough textured and kind of chunky. The main benefit of using 6 strands at a time is that you can cover a large area very quickly. Plus, shapes filled with 6 strands are a little more robust than those made with fewer. It isn't, however, particularly smooth. I made this middle circle using 3 strands. It's much smoother than the 6 strand one and quicker to stitch up than it would have been with 1 strand. All in all, a pretty good compromise. Comparing these two directly in this way, you can see how much flatter and more even this second circle is. This last circle I stitched using just 1 strand of floss. It's by far the smoothest of the 3, but it's also more delicate, therefore only suitable for a smaller area. It can also take quite a while. Size is also something you should pay attention to, especially if you're planning to take your finished piece out of the hoop. Let me show you what I mean. As you can see, when it's no longer in the hoop, this larger shape becomes very loose and distorted. If you were to put this on some clothing or something like that, it might snag. So that's something to bear in mind. This smallest circle, however, holds up very well outside the hoop. By the way, the fabric I'm using for today's tutorial is Kona cotton in Peapod, and the floss is DMC 718, one of my absolutely favorite color combos. Before beginning to stitch, it's really important to separate your floss, even if you're using all 6 strands. It just helps it lay a lot flatter and gives a smoother result. Cut off a length of floss from the skein and gently pull on each strand as I'm doing here to separate them. For today's tutorial, I'm going to be using 2 strands, so I'm pulling 2 of them out of the length of floss and then putting them together again. Choosing the right size of needle for the number of threads you're using is also super important. I'd use this very small one for 1 strand, the medium-sized one for 2 or 3 strands, and for 6 strands, this tapestry needle is a good choice. Just make sure to get a sharp one, not the blunt type, or you'll have trouble getting through the fabric. Using too large a needle with 1 or 2 strands will leave large visible holes in your fabric, whereas using too small a needle with 6 strands will make it hard to get through the fabric, as your needle will make too small a hole for the threads to pass through. Before starting, make sure your fabric is taut and your hoop is tightly closed. If you tap on it, it should sound a little like this. So here we have my flower shape that I'm going to be filling in today. And as you can see, I've drawn these direction lines. This really helps keep the stitches even, especially in a shape like this that contains curves and requires making the stitches at different angles. I've threaded my needle with 2 strands of floss. I'm tying a knot in the end, and then I'm ready to go. I'm going to begin by stitching around the outline of the shape and the inner circle using backstitch. This acts as a guide for the satin stitch and also raises it up ever so slightly, giving it a little more definition. I'm beginning by bringing my needle up through the fabric and down again to make a stitch. Keep your stitches quite small, as it gives us a nice firm boundary for our shape. To make the next stitch, bring your needle up a short distance away from your previous stitch and go back down through the fabric where your last stitch ended. Do the same all the way around the center and the outline of the flower. I love watching sped up embroidery like this. If only it were really this fast in real life. Maybe I'd pick that as my superpower were I ever offered the choice. Speed embroiderer. I like it. With the outline done, it's time to fill our shape in. I'm going to start by stitching along these guidelines and then filling in the gaps between. It makes it a little easier to place the stitches more evenly. The whole premise of satin stitch is that you bring your needle up through the fabric on one side of the shape and down on the other side. Here I'm coming up just outside of the outline and bringing my needle down just on the inside of the circle. And repeat. Although it's certainly not a complicated stitch, it can be tricky to do it well, especially if you're a beginner. But these tips and tricks I've shown you today can vastly improve your first attempt. Okay, so my guidelines are all stitched and it's time to fill in between. I personally find it easier to start filling in around halfway through the space and then do either side. It just makes it a bit easier to get the angle right and get everything even. And that's basically it. Now sit back and enjoy a few seconds of ultimate speed embroidery. Look at me go! And here we are, one smooth satin stitched flower. If you'd like to learn how to create your own realistic colourful thread paintings, I have a whole host of detailed step-by-step patterns available in my Etsy shop, Becky's Embroidery Shop. You can find the link in the description below. If you found this helpful, please subscribe to my channel. I'll be adding lots more embroidery tutorials and how-tos over the coming months. And if there's anything in particular you'd like me to cover, drop me a comment below to let me know. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time.